we are go. Right, still Sunday 15th of January, and we are down to 9 left now. 8 tomorrow. And so we started off on the northeast of the island, and we did Bunnahabhain yesterday, because it's just here because I've just done it. And we'll take a trip a little bit further down the coast. So here's the map of Islay, which is where the distilleries are, and you'll see just down from Bunnahabhain, you should see Caol Ila. So it's not Caol Ila or anything like that. It's one of, when I was working at the whisky shop, one of the consistently most mispronounced distilleries, along with Bunnahabhain, weirdly. People just couldn't say Bunnahabhain, whereas Caol Ila, it was normally Caol Ila was normally the one. And Caol Ila is actually Gaelic for the sound of Islay, but it's not the sound as in this is what Islay sounds like. It's the sound is another term for when you're looking at waterways or rivers or anything like that, or the sea, sound, strait, anything like that. This is the sound of Islay is basically the strip of water between Islay and Jura, which Caol Ila overlooks. This was a distillery that was founded in 1846 by a guy called Hector Henderson, and it had a bit of a checkered history. It wasn't that it was closed and open, but it had a number of different owners. Up to about 1927, it was about 3 or 4 owners between opening in 1846 and 1927. It was a case of kind of bought and then went bankrupt and bought. Nothing, no names really that stand out, nothing particularly interesting, until 1927 when DCL, Distillers Company Limited, took it over. Now DCL, we've come across a number of times in the challenge, was a conglomerate basically of distilleries that kind of used buying power to become more powerful, and they ended up becoming Diageo through various mergers and acquisitions. So DCL took it over in 27. They had an offshoot that was Scottish Malt Distillers that was essentially a kind of like subsidiary of DCL. It was transferred across to them. They closed it down in 1930 and mothballed it. It was surplus to requirements. It was shut for 7 years. It reopened in 1937, then closed down again during the Second World War. But from 1946, basically operated constantly, with the exception of between 1972 and 1974, where they did quite a large expansion, to the point where they took away the malting floors in order to increase the production capabilities. And from that point on, they then started buying their malted barley from the Port Ellen maltings, which is down south of the island. And there are some people, whiskey nerds you call them, and people that are able to source this stuff, where they claim that there is actually a marked difference between pre-1972 Caol Ila, which was quite oily and quite rich, and post 1974 Caol Ila, when they were getting it from Port Ellen, where it's lighter and fresher. So it is now with Diageo, and it used to be that you could only get Caol Ila as part of their flora and fauna range. Now Caol Ila is the largest producing distillery on the island. Of the total amount of whiskey that's produced on Islay, Caol Ila does a quarter of it. It's a volume distillery, and it's really handy for Diageo to be used in blends and everything like that. So up until, what was it, 2002, it was basically a flora and fauna range, and that was it. It was I think it was a 12-year-old at flora and fauna, and that was the one way that you could get Caol Ila, because the rest of it was used in blends. Diageo made the decision that we're actually going to promote Caol Ila. We're going to have it as a core brand. So in 2002, they released a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a cask-strength version that was a no-age statement. In 2005, it actually then became part of the classic malts range. So prior to that, there were 6, which we covered right at the start of the challenge, one of which was Lagavulin. 2005, they expanded the range of the classic malts and put Caol Ila into it. 2006, they then released an unpeated version of Caol Ila. Now, Caol Ila is pretty heavily peated, but not massively so, certainly not to the stage of Ardbeg and things like that. And I still haven't decided when I'm going to talk about phenols and things like that in terms of how to measure peat and smokiness in whiskies. But it's certainly not the peatiest. It does have a peaty character to it. But in 2006, they launched this unpeated 8-year-old, and everybody was like, whoa, Caol Ila, unpeated, what the hell's going on? Turns out that they've actually been doing unpeated whiskey at Caol Ila since the mid-80s. But kept quiet about it because they were actually using that in blends. Caol Ila is in Johnny Walker, but the Caol Ila that's in Johnny Walker apparently is unpeated Caol Ila, not peated. So I think, in fact, when I did Johnny Walker, I was talking about the fact that Caol Ila was in it, and I was picking up some smokiness, which probably was from the Caol Ila. Might not actually be because they're using unpeated. Anyway, So we're now at the stage where Caol Ila 12, 18, now I've got the 12, which was another sample from Jo Lawson, who sent me, this was in the first batch that she sent me, so it's if not the second, it's definitely the first set of samples that I had sent to me as a donation towards the challenge. So I'm eternally grateful to Jo for doing that. She's an absolutely fantastic woman. She's so nice. So this is the 12-year-old, which is their standard version. It is 43%. This is what the bottle looks like if you're trying to find it on the shelf. You're looking at between 35 and 40 quid. Master Malt have got this at 36. Whisky Exchange is selling this for 43. I don't know whether Master Malt have got it on a deal or whether they've got it at a better price, but call it 40 quid for sake of argument. And Caol Ila is very, very highly regarded. I do like Caol Ila. I make no apologies for that, and I have yet to come across a Duff Caol Ila, but I can't remember what the 12-year-old is like. But pretty much every Caol Ila that I've come across has been fantastic. Even independent bottlings have been good. It's just one of those consistently good distilleries that ticks all the boxes for me. But is a large volume producer of whiskey. You know, it does a lot of whiskey. It's not quite a factory, but they do make an awful lot, more than you would think for an island that's so small and has such a reputation from probably the other distilleries as well, and the size of, or the brands as it were, of things like Laphroaig and Ardbeg. You wouldn't think Caol Ila would actually be making a damn sight more, producing a damn sight more whiskey than these bigger names are. So, Caol Ila 12-year-old, 43%. And if you looked at the Bunnahabhain video yesterday, you'll know that was a 12-year-old as well, and that was a really dark colour. Now, I think that's from the sherry cask they're using, rather than colouring that they're added. And I don't think colouring's been added to this, but this is a lot lighter. Now, Caol Ila is peated, and it is there on the nose, but it's always been sort of known as a lighter style compared to the heavier South Coast Islay whiskies. And it's there on the colour of, it's kind of like a Chardonnay wine colour. It's light and it's bright. Now on the nose, straight away you get peat, but it's not smacking you in the face. It's a definite smokiness, but there's also a touch of oil round the edge as well. There's a definite oiliness, and there's a maritime feel to this. So there is smoke. It's not quite medicinal. It's not quite cigarette smoke either, but it's not too far off. So it's like a bonfire rather than a barbecue, and it's almost like it's a bonfire of newspapers. So newspapers tend to give off a particular distinct smell to me, and I think it's because of the ink within the newspapers that's burning that gives you this. And it's not really acrid, but there is an edge to the smokiness that nearly brings it to cigarette smoke, but it's not quite as artificial and death trappy as cigarette smoke is. You know how cigarette smoke's got this real acrid, horrible, I mean, if you smoke, you're probably not thinking that, but it's all the other bits in outside of the nicotine that give you this really kind of burnt plastic, all sorts of god-awful stuff that's being burnt. It's not in there. This is much cleaner. It's a cleaner smoke, but it's definite kind of paper that's being burnt, as well as sea salt, as well as black pepper, as well as this oiliness. But it's a maritime oil. So I'm not talking like diesel oil or anything like that. It's a very pure oil, but it's got this maritime salty edge to it. It's a really nice nose though. And it's not too full on. Again, if you're doing an Islay tasting and trying to introduce people to Islay whiskies and trying to work them up to heavily peated whiskey, you would start with Bunnahabhain, but you probably would move to something like this, or maybe Bruichladdich. Maybe Bruichladdich before this. We'll see how we get on at the end. But this has got that smoky element to it. But I'd argue this isn't the off-putting, whoa, what the hell's going on? It really is a kind of, oh, this is interesting. There is a sweetness to it as well. And yet on the palate, whoa, right at the end, I was about to say, on the palate there is nowhere near the smokiness that's on the nose, and it is, but it's right at the end. It starts off very light, very delicate. The oiliness is sort of there, but really tempered down. But it's very delicate, and it's almost fragrant when you first take it into your mouth. It's almost honeysuckle, sugared almonds, candy floss, gentle sweetness, really light, really delicate. And then all of a sudden, as it travels towards the back of your throat, the smokiness starts to roll in. And as you swallow, you're swallowing that smokiness. But again, it's a sweet, tempered smokiness. Nowhere near as sweet as the Bunnahabhain. This is much more delicate and arguably almost like spring-like for a smoky whiskey. I'm going to try it again. Now is where it kicks in. It really is. If you hold it in the mouth, you're going, this isn't really smoky. I'm not really picking anything up. And it's as it travels down the back of your throat, that's when the smoke kicks in. But again, the smoke is quite light, it's quite delicate, it's not fragrant. The smokiness is there, it's obvious. It's not like you can't tell it's a smoky whiskey. It is there, but it is not smacking you in the chops like something like a Lafroig or an Ardbeg would. But it's creeping up on you, and then all of a sudden you realise that you have a very smoky taste in your mouth. But it's crept up on you, and it lingers, and then it disappears. And what I love about Islay whiskies in particular is this smoky character about them stays on and on and on and on. You don't need to drink as much Islay whiskey as anything else, because the flavour profile, that smokiness just lingers, because it's such a pungent, distinct flavour that you just keep on tasting it. So you don't need to drink as much. It's great, because it saves you money and it's healthier for you, because you're not necking loads down like some kind of alcoholic. It's brilliant. It's great stuff. Islay whiskey, it's healthy for you. Don't quote me on that, please. Don't use that as a clip in something news report about, Yorkshireman encourages people to drink loads of whiskey because it's healthy for you. It's not, but in moderation. You know what I mean. But yeah, this is I wouldn't call this a fragrant Islay whiskey, but there is a delicacy to it. There is a light touch which makes it really, really pleasant. I had forgotten just how light this was. I'd forgotten how, and it's two-toned as well. It really is. It starts off as a light, not sweet, but a light spring-like whiskey, and then turns into a smoky, but still light on its feet whiskey, but with a real kind of an obvious smoky impact to it. But it works. It doesn't go from one bang, there's your smoke. It develops and it evolves in your mouth. It's so good. I love it. Again, if you don't like peated whiskey, you're probably not going to like this. However, if you've never tried a peated whiskey, or you really don't like Ardbegs, but you want to give something a go, you want to sort of see, okay, it's been ages since I've had something like Ardbeg Lafroig, I'm willing to give it another shot, but I don't really want to go straight back into the full-on stuff. Caol Ila is probably one of the best middle grounds to give you softness, a little bit of sweetness, a bit of delicacy, as well as some smoky intensity, but nothing too overpowering, but enough to give you the idea of where you would be going. Great whiskey. I still love the stuff. I still have yet to find a Duff Caol Ila. And I hope I never do, because I think it's excellent. Joe, thank you for the sample again. Absolutely fantastic. And we have 8 left to go. We are nearly there. So I shall see you in the next one. Cheers.